Continuing with our walk. Apparently, many of the streets, especially these narrow winding paths, follow the original medieval layout of the city. Of course, layout implies that there was some sort of intentionality to it, which there, of course, was not in many cases. The medieval cityscapes mostly evolved as a sort of metastasis of civilization. A closed gelateria. What a great painting. Love that. But if you compare pictures of cityscapes, paintings and frescoes of cityscapes from the Italian city-states of this, from the 15th century and the 16th century to what you're seeing now, you will notice that there isn't much difference. That not much has changed in terms of the architectural style. Even if some of these buildings may be newer, they were built in that 15th century, that Quattrocento architecture. Most of these buildings, though, are original to the 15th or 16th century. Florence does not have many of its medieval buildings left. There are a few, though. And if we pass them, I will point them out, and you may notice the difference between these palazzi with their tiers of windows in decreasing size as one ascends, and the medieval tower houses of Florence, which reflect a series of security issues from an era when internecine violence was rampant here, and when the families fought like tribes. Ultimately, it was the Medici who won that tribal war. Oh my. You can see the sheen on the road. That's because Florence is very meticulous about maintaining cleanliness. Oh, here is what I call a sort of reflection of Florence's late medieval and Renaissance greatness. You're going to say Giorgio Armani, but how is that? That's very modern. Well, yes, the brand is modern. The concept of extremely fine designer goods that cost far too much money is very native to Florence. Oh, here we have Gucci, of course. Here we have the Palazzo Strozzi, which you're going to maybe observe is oversized. It is. It's absolutely oversized. I will walk up closer so you can see where my hand comes relative to those rings. It doesn't. Right, I can't even reach them. So yes, the Palazzo Strozzi was built specifically to outshine or outsize the Palazzo Medici, and it did, for certain. Unfortunately, the Strozzi found themselves on the wrong side of history, specifically the wrong side of the Medici. And so they ended up exiled, banished from the city. The men did. The menfolk were, of course. The women were allowed to stay and continue to operate their household. And so we have a series of letters from Alessandra Strozzi between her sons, because she was a widow, her husband was dead. And we have a series of letters between her and her sons who are in Rome, talking about arranging their marriages and making their underwear and their shirts, and also discussing how they don't write often enough to her and how her heart breaks. Not much has changed between Italian mothers and their sons, actually, as far as I can tell. It's a very authentic, almost dysfunctional level of attachment. Not with their daughters. There doesn't seem to be that kind of affection with the daughters in this era. It's not found. I can't seem to find so many traces of it in the correspondence as I do between mothers and sons. So this amazing palazzo now belongs to the Ferragamo family, but they do not live in it. It is their flagship store, shall we say, and of course their own private museum, which is currently showing an exhibit on silk screening specifically. I paid the overpriced amount to go into that exhibit to see some very nice silk screened scarves from their past collections, but I would never say that it was worth that. Actually, I think because it's dawn, we're going to head to the Arno, to the riverside, and see what we can see from there in the dawn light. This is Santa Trinita. For my 15th century people, some of Ghirlandaio's seminal frescoes are in there. Unfortunately, they're very strict about cameras in there, but and the lighting is not great for it either. But I will see what I can do about getting some actually good footage of those amazing frescoes. Great sources for ladies' attire in the second half of the 15th century. See a Zegna store. Here you can see the Ferragamo store. Oh, let's just go take a look at the prices just to amuse ourselves, shall we? So here's this ensemble. €1,790 for that purse. Let me see, 12,900 for the other purse thing. The item in fur, which I'm not seeing, is apparently $4,500. The pants are $1,150. And the glasses are $250, so sunglasses are $250. So I could afford those sunglasses. Not that I would ever spend that much on sunglasses, because I lose sunglasses and break them, and I'm certainly not going to invest €250, not dollars, sorry, euros, in something I will invariably lose or destroy. Sunglasses are unfortunately disposable for me, and that's not on purpose, it's an accident. But here we are, the Arno at dawn. Is she not amazing? Look at that hodgepodge of amazing architecture crowding the river, leaning precariously over it on ancient buttressing. In some cases, not so ancient. You can see there's some steel buttressing a little further on there, in supporting buildings that are very clearly post-medieval. Florence did take damage during the war being World War II, for those who might not be in my head. And so one can always tell where the damage was taken, because those buildings were not rebuilt. There was no money for it. They were not rebuilt in the original medieval or Renaissance style. They were rebuilt modernly. So they're generally fairly hideous paeans to a repulsive style of architecture that I hope the world may never see again. That is the Ponte Vecchio, and you can also see how the little shops perch out over the river. Well, that's because those used to be butcher's shops, and they still have some of the holes, actually, where they would slaughter animals and the blood would drain straight into the river. And the apocryphal tale goes that when the Medici became the Grand Dukes of Tuscany and they moved to the other side of the river, Oltrarno, to the Palazzo Pitti, they built a corridor, which you can see actually just behind the buildings, cutting straight across the bridge. They built a corridor connecting to the Uffizi, the offices of state, so that they could proceed from their palazzo to the place they needed to manage the government without, interacting with the hoi polloi. Well, apparently the stench from the butcher shops was sufficient to, even in the corridor, that the Medici ordered the butchers to be relocated and ordered the least innocuous trade they could think of to be put in its place, also one that is splendid and gorgeous, that being the goldsmiths. So that is why there are now goldsmiths on the Ponte Vecchio, because the Medici in the 16th century decided there should be. I inquired as to where the butchers were sent, and apparently no one knows. That was not important enough to record in history. Oh well. So this arcade is part of that corridor I mentioned. And it's the Correggio Vasari, it's called, Vasari Corridor, and I think it might be open again. I'm going to check. I hope it is for tours, because then you can actually take a tour, a guided tour in it, and walk from the Palazzo di Uffizi all the way over to the Palazzo Pitti, and they give history and whatnot. So I'm hoping that's open again, and I'll be able to take advantage. Yeah, just hear the songs of the birds. This is the emptiest, I think, one will ever find this place. I'm confident that late at night it is filled with inebriated individuals engaged in various sorts of jocularity. But right now, they are all passed out, comatose perhaps even. So, thank goodness for jet lag, and thank goodness I finally gave up trying to get more sleep. I just got up and got out. This is the first time I've ever been out this early in the morning in Florence, and I will say it is worth it. The misty mountains over there. It's not a mountain though. That's the Piazzale Michelangelo over up ahead, the misty, mist and swathed space. That is the place where all go to watch the sunset in the afternoon and drink wine and be social, because the sunset view from there is heavenly, and I mean that in a very literal sense. Metaphorical, allegorical, and literal, considering that the sun does set in the heavens. So here is the Uffizi, and behind it the Signoria, the old city hall. So if you've ever heard of the Uffizi, this is the central courtyard of it. It's a U-shaped building, and it used to house the offices, that's hence Uffizi, the offices of state, of government, and now it houses one of the most amazing collections of late medieval and Renaissance art in the world. The other side of the river, Oltre Arno, it's called, which literally means the other Arno. It's sort of an abbreviation for the other side of the Arno, Oltre Arno. Probably used to be something like Oltrato dell'Arno, and then that just contracted over time. As you may or may not know, language is lazy. This is the Museo Galileo, which is shockingly, another palazzo with a loggia up there that's also been enclosed. I have not been here yet, but I do plan on making a visit this time. The history of science is also a topic that fascinates me. Art and science tend to go hand in hand. The creativity required for one is required for the other. And that is why many great artists were also scientists. Da Vinci was not the only one. Here is the Chamber of Commerce, Camera di Commercio, and the sign over there says that it's specifically for 3 different industries, but I suspect that maybe it's just now the more general Chamber of Commerce for the city. Oh, the bus. Actual Florentines out for a run. I feel as though I may have overdressed. Well, it was quite cold when I stepped out. Again, the amazing palazzi. So you can see the old Gothic windows on that one, and they've been filled in with square windows, probably in some later date, 17th century, 18th century or later. Maybe even when they went to install glass in the windows, because some of you may not know this, but windows did not always have glass. Glass used to be super expensive and difficult to produce and delicate. And so windows were actually shuttered and covered in other materials such as greased parchment, or sometimes just fabric. But greased parchment was a common one. Greased paper, another one. And then those heavy wooden shutters were used when it was actually cold, to try to keep out the cold air in for those who could afford it. And that's why poor homes generally had tiny, tiny windows, because preventing hypothermia was more important than having daylight in one's home. Well, shall we cross? Look back at the Ponte Vecchio from this side as we go. So, back to the windows. I can imagine that perhaps when they went to install glass, they decided that that arched shape was too complex and too annoying and perhaps too expensive, and perhaps more glass than they wished to pay for. So they filled in the windows partially into an easier to manage square shape, perhaps. But that is a random Contessa conjecture. I have no current evidence of that, so take that as you will. So the Oltrarno is the new city, in quotes. Apparently it started to be inhabited by regular people in the 13th century. I think before that there was probably a convent over on this side. Nearly always there are convents in the outskirts of the city, because convents and monasteries tried very hard to be hermetic in the early days. Anyway, so this is where the less well-to-do lived, the servants of the great houses, for instance, at first. They lived on the other side of the river, and the great palazzi were on the inside of the city then. But eventually they built a wall to incorporate the Oltrarno into Florence proper and to protect it. And that is the part of the wall that has actually survived of the original medieval Florentine wall, because otherwise on what I'll call the Uffizi side of the river, there is no medieval wall left. That was torn down. And I don't remember, honestly, if it was torn down here at the behest of the likes of Napoleon. He was very famous for ordering city walls to be torn down across Europe wherever he conquered. He thought that city walls gave citizens bad ideas, as in they can close the gate if they need to and keep his forces out. I'm not certain that that happened here, though. It could have just been a question of the city expanding, the wall being obsolete, and wanting the space for it. But if you look at a map of Florence, you can actually see where the wall used to be, because the streets on that part of the city run around it in a ring. And that is the footprint of the medieval wall. So here is a venerable palazzo, Palazzo dei Mozzi. This is one of the earliest ones. I think that was probably on this side of the river. It dates from the 13th century. Yeah. Quite an impressive structure. Onward. This side of the city is sadly not pedestrianized. Not that I would exactly call this a through road, mind you, but there is vehicular traffic here. So one must be more mindful than when walking around the Uffizi side of the river. This is the side of the river that I recommend people go to if they want to get away from the tourist areas, because a lot more actual Florentines live over here. Although, unfortunately, the Oltrarno has now been discovered by Airbnb entrepreneurs, and so many of these apartments are getting bought up, converted into rental properties, and driving real estate prices to the point where locals can no longer afford to live here, or increasingly cannot afford to live here anymore. So we'll see what steps Florence might take to try to bring the city back to its people, or if they decide at all to do that. But this side of the river is still more authentically Florentine, shall we say? In the sense of more Florentines live and inhabit these spaces. Oh, here is a perfume shop. And if you do not know, Florence is the capital of perfume making, actually, in Europe, and historically has always been that. And you can actually go to these shops and you'll get an entire experience. I'm planning to try it this time. And they will do scent testing with you, and they will make a blend that suits your specific needs and chemistry. So I plan on hitting one of these shops. I'm not a huge perfume person, but I do like to wear it for special occasions. But I would like it to be subtle, understated, and harmonious with my person, and also appealing to those who may pass me. And there's something exciting about getting a perfume that's made just for me. Oh, I love these. This is a photographer's shop. Closed during the winter for appointments. A lot of local artists have shops and galleries on this side of the river as well. Not aimed at tourists necessarily. As I said, one does wish to stop and look in the windows when there are windows to be viewed, because there are generally interesting things inside of them. Or if the glass is clear enough to view it. Otrano is also where there are a lot of much less expensive restaurants. So here's an interesting one. This person has taken a very famous sculpture by, I can't remember who did this Apollo and Daphne. There are so many. But he's taken a sculpture, very famous Renaissance sculpture, early Baroque sculpture, and painted it. I think this might be a Caravaggio. No, there's another name that's not coming. Anyway, and he's actually turned it into a painting. So this is actually his workshop. You can actually see the tools of his trade here. Well, sort of. Unfortunately, the reflection is mostly what's showing now. I haven't gone into this church yet, but I bet that there are possibly interesting medieval and or Renaissance frescoes inside. So I do plan on trying to go in at some point. So here there are a lot of restaurants that are much more local, although I did see a number of tourists in them yesterday. It's one of the reasons to go to the Otrano. And here is the promised medieval city wall that I mentioned. As I said, not much of this remains. It's only on the Otrano side, because this abuts hills, pretty steep hills, actually. And so there's no reason to put great sweeping avenues through here. This is not the industry side of the city, as it were. This is still a more idyllic part of the city. Basically, once cannon fire became powerful enough to pierce these walls easily, these sorts of fortifications were rendered null and void. Now, granted, this one is a medieval wall, so it is not designed for artillery. Lucca, though, has an amazing set of complete fortifications from the Renaissance that were designed very much for artillery. And we'll be going there at some point here in the coming 2 weeks. And I'll, of course, give you a tour. And you will see the difference between these relatively slender, dainty walls and the immensely wide, almost obese fortifications of Lucca. And there's that beautiful Japanese garden up there. Can't really see necessarily from your perspective, but it's an amazing little, it could be Korean, honestly. I've seen similar garden features in Korea. I've never gone in. I'm not certain that one can, whether it's oh, look here, maybe. Let's go up these stairs and find out, shall we? Nope, this is not the access to the garden. This is just where people like me have cut through to avoid the road. But maybe you can see the garden from a better vantage point here. And it's just sort of inlaid into this crook of the bend. Perhaps there is an access point further up, so let us continue to climb. Apologize, it's a little rough here. The view might become a little craggy from your perspective. See, the wall continues. And yes, ivy and ivy-like plant life, it seems so elegant and romantic and emotive, but really, those are deadly for stonework. They lay their roots in the mortar and literally tear it apart bit by bit. So as much as you may like ivy, it should really not be on any structure you would care to see survive. Going up and up and up. Oh my, yes. Time to remove the silk scarf. And, oh, sorry. And as you ascend any place in the world, always stop and get a look at the view as you go, because at different levels everything will appear different, and so you want to make sure you enjoy the view from each of those levels, because the objects might be the same, but the perspective from which you will enjoy them will historically change. And so it seems that this Japanese garden, as I said, appears to be private. Perhaps I cannot find an access to it, but let us continue on, and perhaps I will. Over there you can see the medieval wall rising gracefully up over that hill in the mist. Buttressed on this side, of course. That actually leads to the Fortezza Belvedere and also the Giardini Boboli on the other side. And the gardens that you can kind of vaguely see on this side are the Villa Albini. Those who tried to go there as well this time. I did not make it on my last again. Again, look how the mist has swallowed the dome of Santa Maria Novella. You can barely see it. Certainly swallowed the bell tower of the Signoria. And just found this state. Oh, this is the rose garden. Oh yes, it's normally... Oh. So this is the rose garden. We'll come back later. it is quite beautiful. And it's one of those green spaces that I have mentioned that do exist, in fact, here in Florence. You just have to cross the river to find it. This wall, which was built to resemble some sort of grotto from the sea. I've said in other places, ironic considering that Florence is very far from the sea and on a malarial river. The Arno may look beautiful in the dawn and at other times of day as well, but it is a breeding ground for mosquitoes, it and all of its semi-stagnant tributaries. Thankfully, in February, all the mosquitoes seem to have died or perhaps entered hibernation. I'm not an entomologist. I know nothing about mosquitoes' life cycle, really, other than that they breed in water with their eggs incubating water. So, the view as we ascend. This is one of the old city gates. It's amazing tower. You can't tell how tall it is from here. When we go back down, I will probably go that way and show you how imposing it is. There's a bridal couple descending, and no doubt having taken mystical photos in the foggy view. Here this way. Her gown is already absolutely filthy. So she considered her photography quite carefully. First, she was taking post-wedding photos, and I was going to get some nice shots of her in her wedding dress. I did that for my first wedding. A year after the fact, I was taking some professional photos. So it turned out very beautiful. It was amazing. Probably very talented. I'm not